When I first started doing therapy, which was 40 years ago, shortly after I worked at Lynn Benton Community College and I taught classes. And shortly after I started, I got an invitation to work with a group of nurses. The nurses had had this incredible connected experience with each other. They'd worked together for ages and they had been a part of each other's lives. They had potlucks and they were in each other's families and they were support and they were connected and they were friends outside of work. And then the system changed and the person who had been involved as the head nurse was sent off somewhere. And one of the nurses in this group of people became the head nurse. And one of her jobs was to give feedback, was to give evaluations to all the people in the group. And everything fell apart. She gave evaluations and suddenly everybody was fighting. They didn't like her. She was out. She wasn't invited to things anymore. And it was just this great big mess. And I was invited in to try to work with them. And I didn't know a lot about what I was doing, but what I did figure out was that it all happened when she had to give evaluations. And she had been given no instructions for how to give evaluations. She was just told, Peggy's doing, these were all women. This was a long time ago. Peggy's late to work, and Sue is doing a bad job with XYZ. So she just told them. And they all sort of fell apart. The relationships fell apart. And I was teaching communication at that time at Oregon State. And I thought, there's something wrong here. She is telling them, she's giving them information without any skill. So I taught her some of the things that I knew, which wasn't huge. But in that point, they were talking about, it was a big thing about the sandwich technique, which was when you're going to give feedback, evaluations, you don't start out by saying you're a bad player on a team. You start out by saying people really love to work with you and we really appreciate your generosity. And one of the things that happens is X, and then you end with something that's positive because it's a lot easier to absorb. So that all worked and she got better at it and they became friends again. And it was sort of amazing. That was 40 years ago. And a few years later, my husband, who's a New Zealand, who was then a New Zealand veterinarian, who I'd known since I was in my late 20s, came to live forever with me. And we had this very deep commitment to be together. And we were both clueless. We did not have good skills. We'd been in other relationships. They hadn't gone so well. And so what we had was this sense like, this is a relationship we really want, but we didn't know how to do it. And at that time, I was sort of a generic therapist, and I had learned a lot about marriage counseling in my classes, but all of it felt wrong. People often left marriage counseling feeling worse than when they started. And I didn't want to, and Tim, my husband, said, maybe we should go to counseling. I said, I don't believe in it, which was sort of a horrible thing to say because I was a counselor, but I actually didn't. So we had this idea that there were people that had to know how to do this relationship thing better than we did. That wasn't just about counseling. At that point, counseling was so much about who's doing what wrong. And so we started to study and we started to read books. And it was about the time that all these great books were coming out. And we found people who wrote the smartest books and went and studied with them. And he's a veterinarian, but he came with me and we became imago therapists, if you know the work of Harville Hendricks. And his work is all about the idea that we marry our unfinished business or we partner with our unfinished business, that where we get triggered is because something is poking something in us that happened a long time ago. We became master teachers for something called the PAIRS process, which is the practical application of interpersonal relationship skills. And that was really great. That was a 2-year program. And that was kind of a synthesis of everything that was known in the field that was being taught to couples. So it wasn't taught to couples in a therapist's office, but taught in classes. And we did all kinds of other things, trained with all kinds of people, and eventually began to teach our own class, which we did for many, many years in Corvallis. We taught weekend classes and longer classes. And then when COVID came, they stopped, and I just started doing talks on the internet. And as some of you know, I speak a lot at Rancho La Puerta. So I just began to talk about this, and I slowly developed a class online that people thought was really great. I didn't know how it would work with Zoom because I was used to people being in a room together, but it worked really well for most people. And out of all of that came 2 books, and I'm going to plug my own books right now. I think they're great. They're not requirements, but the book, a lot of what you're going to get is from this book. It's called Love Skills. And so this is a workbook that is the class that we put together, that I put together from all the years that we had trained. And then the first book I wrote, which is my favorite, is called Love Cycles. They're on Amazon. So I really recommend those books. They talk about a lot of what you're going to learn here. I don't know what's wrong with my camera, but can you see me?
You have it on fuzz, so it has to be right in front of your face and your body. Otherwise, it's blurring out.
I am so grateful when people tell me things like that. It's all fuzz. Thank you. One of the things that many of us struggle with when we get into inevitable trouble in our relationship, which everybody does, because people are trouble, because it's very complicated to be a human being. And you bring 2 human beings together and you've got more complications. And because relationships move in seasons and cycles, and our proclivity, our training mostly through our culture is that we fall in love and then that's it. And we go off into the sunset. And when we get into what you'll learn about, into loops, when we get into power struggles, when we get into hurt feelings, something's wrong. And it's not that something's wrong. It's that we don't know how to deal with those. We haven't had training, most of us, in that, in the same way that nurse didn't have training in how to give the feedback. So wherever you are, whatever your situation is, you're going to get something out of this that's going to be really useful, not just for your relationship with your partner, but all of your relationships. But one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is listen to it together, because here's what you're going to get at the other end. You're going to get a language that you both understand, and you can use that language when things get into trouble, which they will, that you can use that language to say, okay, this is what's going on. And it's not a language of blame, because what happens is when we move into inevitable struggle, what we see is we see the other person, and it feels like they've said something or done something that has caused it. But that's usually not what's going on. Usually what's going on is that we've moved into an arena which is an inevitable kind of clash between 2 very different people, and we don't know how to get out of it gracefully without doing damage. That day, my husband came back from a bike ride, and he had something happened with his chain, which I think is, bicycle chains are like one of the more boring things to talk about in the whole world. And he came back and he had done some, his chain had broken, he had it fixed. And I felt this moment that he was inviting me to listen to something important to him. So I didn't care about the bicycle chain, but I cared about him. So I did it. I said, tell me about the bicycle chain. He said, you don't want to hear about the bicycle chain. I said, no, I do. It really meant something. You learned something. So he told me. And then about an hour later, and I listened, and I still don't care about bicycle chains, but I cared about him. And it was very sweet. Something happened that was very sweet when we were we were okay, but not great. And later on, he said, you know, that new restaurant you really want to go to, let's do that. It was like this goodwill started opening, practicing goodwill. So taking those moments, that's a skill that we can do no matter what is going on. When we're in loops, which you'll get to know what that means, we tend to shut down. When our feelings are hurt, when we're in power struggles, we tend to shut down and move apart. So one of the secrets is you keep doing the acts of kindness, not fake ones, but but you do them no matter what else is going on because it lets you reboot.